The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? lit. Real, live, lit. Right? The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is themed, The Verdict is In, Reparations Now, Part 3. The book documents the First World Tribunal on reparations for African people in the U.S., organized by the African People's Socialist Party and held in Brooklyn, New York in 1982. This historic hearing used international law to put the U.S. government on trial for genocide against African people. The panel of judges ruled that the U.S. owed then $4.1 trillion in reparations to African people. Chairman Omali Yeshitela served as the people's advocate, presiding over the proceedings. This historic book records his statements and the testimonies of African workers, academics, and experts. Compelling testimonies were given by Professor Leonard Jeffries, Black Panther leader Afeni Shakur, Professor Del Hunter, Attica prison resistor Akil Al-Jundi, political prisoner Mufundi Lake, and many more. The book is available for purchase at theburningspear.store, and this new edition features a new preface, an introduction by Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, and an epilogue by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. For today's study, we are continuing the readings of the powerful presentations delivered by the People's Advocate. Chairman Omali delivered the tribunal's opening statement, summaries on the indictment of the U.S. for the crime of genocide, and the final verdict. So today we'll be reading the summary of the tribunal itself, the epilogue, as well as the foreword by Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa. And after we do our readings, we'll break for announcements and then take your questions. So before we start, of course, we want you to like and share this video far and wide. Take a moment right now, like this video, tag your friends, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are on the road to 20,000 subscribers, so become one of those subscribers today. Go to The Burning Spear TV on YouTube, or if you're already watching, go ahead and click that subscriber button right now. Also, throughout the study, we'd like for any donations to go to uhurutours.com/donate. Donating to Uhuru Tours today will help to bring the electrifying presentations, which you'll hear today, of Chairman Omali Yeshitela to the Northeast U.S. this fall. Again, that is uhurutours.com/donate. So let's start our reading. You can access the reading materials inside the Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter description, wherever it is you're watching from. The pieces that we'll be reading today are available in those descriptions so that you can follow along and, of course, purchase the full copy so you can have the full experience at theburningspear.store. So we're starting with the foreword by Luwezi Kinshasa, which begins in the book on page 1. So the significance of the book Reparations Now. I was born in Kinshasa, Congo, in the decade following the assassination of our great African patriot, Patrice Lumumba, by the colonial powers. I grew up in a time of counterinsurgency during the years of the reign of the brutal US created and backed neo-colonialist Joseph Mobutu. I experienced the demoralization of the masses of the people, whose exuberant resistance had dominated the 1960s in Africa and the US. The African masses whose struggle ushered in victory for Lumumba in Congo were now terrorized, powerless, and deeply impoverished. The heady vision of African liberation and unification espoused by Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, and the great Marcus Garvey before them now seemed far out of reach. The revolutionary struggle for one united Africa, in which the colonially imposed borders were overturned and the resources of Africa were again in the hands of African people ourselves, was gone. And nearly all the revolutionary leaders of the 1960s had been assassinated. As a young person, I was among the hundreds of thousands of Africans who leave our Africa every year in pursuit of our stolen resources in Europe. I landed first in France in 1988, and then in London, where I have lived in exile. As a person whose life has been lived in the shadow of the colonial exploitation of Africa, the search for a future of African independence, unification, and self-government has always been with me. I have never heard of a reparations demand or any movement for reparations led by a revolutionary Black political organization. I had no idea that there were white people working under the leadership of an African organization to provide material solidarity in the form of reparations. The idea of any organization putting the US ruling class on trial for crimes against African people was completely unprecedented. Seeking answers about the struggle of African people, I studied considerably about the Black Power movement of the 1960s, but found no evidence of any African organization currently talking about revolution some 30 years later. It may have been the end of summer in 1991 at Présence Africaine, a renowned bookshop in Paris, France, where I first happened upon the book Reparations Now. I thought it odd at first that it was the only book in English. I decided to buy this book, and my life was forever changed. When I read Reparations Now, I was surprised by the advanced character of the document. It served as a compilation of the proceedings that occurred at the First International Tribunal on Reparations for Black people in the US, held November 13th and 14th, 1982, in Brooklyn, New York. The tribunal was sponsored by the African People's Socialist Party, organizing to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. APSP Chairman Omali Yeshitela, in his role as the people's advocate, was brilliant. I had seen documentaries and read books on Black people's struggles in the US, often characterized as civil rights by the colonizers, or documentaries about the so-called independence struggles in Africa. But I hadn't yet located a single piece of literature from an organization or leader that brought all fronts of the African Revolution together as Marcus Garvey had. At that time, most of the books and literature available to us were written by the radical African petty bourgeoisie, who did not unite with the goal of the African working class coming to power. Many of our leaders from the previous period had been assassinated before they matured as revolutionary thinkers and practitioners. In this period, I had never seen a party of the African working class built around our own interests. The great majority of the previous era of anti-colonial writers would have been heavily influenced by the German philosopher Karl Marx and the white left. Reparations Now was the first time I saw a book written and produced by the African proletariat, teaching itself and all oppressed Africans and other colonized people about the reparations struggle. It was an introduction to the capacity of the African working class to lead its own struggle and communicate to the whole world on its own terms. The book was a revolutionary philosophical bombshell. I read testimonies from courageous Africans such as Mafundi Lake, Afeni Shakur, and many others that deeply resonated with me. As an African born in Congo and living in exile in Europe, I experienced the African national bond with my brothers and sisters who had been kidnapped and enslaved in the US and elsewhere. The book provided answers to what happened to the Black Revolution of the 60s in the US and around the world. Many people of my generation were led to believe armed struggle was the only form of struggle and that everything has to be done secretly in order to be effective. Concretely, these discussions never left the study rooms, leaving the African petty bourgeoisie to continue its dominance over democratic struggles, guaranteeing the reproduction of neocolonialism in Africa and elsewhere with no intentions to advance the African Revolution. Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the most advanced theoretician of our time. This discovery marked for me the death of the white left. Africans could be socialists without them, and in fact are the leaders on this question. The white left were not real socialists, but part of the status quo. Unlike those influenced by Marx and the white left, this book showed me for the first time revolutionary theory that had become property of the African working class. I was reading Chairman Omali Yeshitela on the meaning of being an African revolutionary in our times. Reading the book for the first time gave me the glue that puts everything together, facilitating the revolutionary process. It provided a worldview or world philosophical approach that is rooted in the struggle of African people, that is systematic and consistent without claiming to be Marxist and Leninist. The party opened up a new world without being anti Marx or Lenin, but ahead of them. The book explained that the African Revolution is a world event that speaks to all Africans and all colonized peoples on the planet. This is something you could not read anywhere else. The tribunal was a sharp example of unity of theory and practice. We can see that 40 years later, the unity continues to grow around the world as more and more Africans are demanding reparations without even being aware of the historical leadership provided by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and his revolutionary theory of African internationalism. Until that point, I had not met any leadership, any organization whose starting point was African people as a universal entity, a leadership that wants Black freedom in its totality. Through this book, I encountered a leadership that unambiguously said that African people in the US and elsewhere who have been dispersed by our colonial oppressors are unequivocally Africans. The publication of Reparations Now was an example of the redemption of the African working class, armed with the science of African internationalism, being made capable of speaking and standing up for itself. Black freedom is only possible in the context of a unified African liberation movement under the leadership of the African working class. I saw this book as the first genuine connection between African state power, an African workers' state, and world socialism. It marked for me a beginning of a more confident African working class against the bourgeoisie and the African petty bourgeoisie, where victory is seen as certain. We can't be defeated. It was an example of African workers making history, taking the initiative on a strategic question such as reparations, transforming it into a revolutionary demand that could be organized around and practically seized. It was a historic event where the history of a free Africa was written. The boldness of passing a guilty verdict was awesome to experience vicariously through the pages of Reparations Now. The only thing missing has been state power. This ingredient, necessary to enforce the outcomes of our tribunal, is being solved with the present day work of our party. Undoubtedly, this book changed my life, bringing me into a relationship with this revolutionary organization, calling on us not to be observers or bystanders of history, but to actively participate in forwarding the project to free our Africa and African people. Till it's won, Reparations Now. Luwezi, Kinshasa, Secretary General, African Socialist International. So that is the foreword for The Verdict is In, Reparations Now, which is a part of the new edition of this book. And before I turn it over to the leader of the African nation, the worldwide African revolution, the most advanced theoretician of our time, as stated by Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, I want to make sure that we have a huge audience, all the shares, all the subscribers, all the likes and follows happening right now, so we can prepare virtually to welcome our leader onto the stage to continue us in this reading of The Verdict is in, Reparations Now. So go ahead, hit that like button, hit that share button, tag somebody in the comment section right now. They have to be a part of this discussion. You just heard this brilliant foreword of how powerful this book was, how powerful this event was in history. And so we want people to be a part of the present day discussion and to become a part of this movement. So take this time right now, get this discussion out there, and let's welcome up the leader of the African nation, the worldwide African revolution, and the people's advocate to this tribunal, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman, welcome.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Comrade Sister Akile, for the introduction. And I want to, again, acknowledge everybody who has come on to the study on today, and especially comrades in Africa and throughout the Caribbean and those other areas of the African world where our resources have been sucked to the extent that it has impacted the development of infrastructure that serves our interests and our needs. I know that in Africa, that there are people who are involved in group study, and I just want to salute you. And I also want to acknowledge those brothers and sisters and comrades who come here to the Uhuru House in St. Louis, where I'm located. And my darling baby has just shown up, Nova, who I'm always so happy to see. I think has she turned 8 yet? She hasn't turned 8 yet, but she acts like she's about 38 in so many ways. She worked so hard for our movement. I wanted to acknowledge your presence too. Also, I'm with Comrade Director Kile, who talks about how we have to get more and more subscribers to this process. We're looking for 20,000, and we might as well do that. Make that happen. So please do what's necessary to share this, to get the word out, to open up new platforms and things like that for us. Because as you know, work is done all the time to keep our struggle and our movement isolated. In fact, that's one of the reasons that our party has come under a major attack by the United States government, because it would rather people not be able to hear what it is that we have to say. And this work that we're doing now, the study on the Reparations Now book, The Verdict is In. The republishing of that book is just one of the important things that we do, that we have done. The foreword that we just read from Comrade Luwezi, Kinshasa, that talks about how it connected so much for him as an African refugee from Congo to come to France and England, come to France and run into this and see for the first time in his life all of this being pulled together so that we reconnect Africans globally. And this is a really important time in history. As you know, we see revolutionary struggle, or at least resistance to obvious aspects of colonialism happening throughout the world, and much of it concentrated in Africa, which is the beginning of the entire process that established this filthy social system that bleeds and kills and rapes and initiates pillage, all over the world, starvation all over the world. So this is an important era. I want to, I'll have to say Uhuru to Jewel Ali, and see Rage here, and say Uhuru Rage and Matum, and also to Comrades Matum out of Philadelphia, and Mandisi. Good to see you, comrade. I'm glad that you are here with us, and Mandisi, of course, is in Boston. Kabula, Uhuru Comrade Kabula, who was with us on yesterday at the marketplace, at the farmers market that we have in O'Fallon Park right here in St. Louis, that's presided over by Comrade Rage, who I just mentioned earlier. There are other people, Stephanie and Virginia and Luwezi and Serap C, Uhuru Comrade Serap C out of England. It used to be called the United Kingdom, but increasingly it's less united. So just some of the people I wanted to acknowledge. Robert Brown out of Collegeville, Pennsylvania. Good to see you with us, comrade. And so I'm going to begin. Janine, good to see you here, comrade. I recall Janine, what is that thing, Richard Kimberly, and that movie that they made some time ago, The Fugitive. That's sort of an inside joke. Good to see you. Comrade Janine and Diane Tournay, and just a lot of good folk. I see you there, and just do everything that we can. Comrade Zakili out of Occupy Tanzania, that white people love to call South Africa, hoping that we'll forget. So it's really good to see all of you, and just do everything we can to get this word out and break out of this encirclement that the oppressor has attempted to impose on us, so that we can't communicate with each other and we can't communicate with the world. So I'm going to go now into the summation of this World Tribunal that we did in 1982. This was a year after the first Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, which itself was held 9 years after our founding. It took 9 years for that to occur for a couple of reasons. One, our inexperience as a party of the African working class in actuality, in fact, not just based on theoretical assumptions and how we understood the workers are the critical factor in making history, leading this process of the people. But also because the United States government had initiated a horrible reign of terror that crushed the African Revolution, that had killed Malcolm, killed Huey, well, it hadn't killed Huey at that time, but killed Martin Luther King. 30 members of the Black Panther Party had been killed by now. The founder, the co-founder of the African People's Socialist Party had been assassinated down in Fort Myers, Florida. So havoc in Africa. Lumumba had been killed, and Nkrumah had been overthrown and killed. So havoc was being wreaked. Che Guevara was killed. The movement that came out of this whole expression of anti-colonialism and the hatred of colonialism that we saw happen in Cuba in 1972 with the emergence of the Tri-Continental Conference and movement. All of this had been shut down by the time this is part of what had affected the ability of us to have a Congress right away. There were meetings that people were having where they were being raided by FBI police organizations with guns, frightening children. As we know, Fred Hampton was asleep in his bed when the FBI, with the local Chicago Police Department, had come in at 4 o'clock in the morning in West Monroe and killed Hampton as he lay in bed next to his wife, who was more than 8 months pregnant with his child. This is the kind of thing that made it difficult for us to have a Congress, an open Congress, before the one that occurred in 1981. We couldn't have announced it because the government was terroristic and terrorizing and crushing anything that approximated revolutionary struggle. And the African People's Socialist Party was founded with the stated intent to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. Many organizations have been pushed to a situation where they concluded that we just had to build coalitions, that we just couldn't have an actual revolutionary party organization such as that. The many forces actually went underground, disappeared, quit, but the party continued to pursue this revolution, and as a consequence of being there, not functioning primarily from a prison, or not being pushed out of the country, not being pushed out of the struggle by the terror that had been initiated, we had an opportunity to grow and develop under these circumstances to continue the revolution, but not to divert our energies, not to say, okay, since they're killing revolutionaries, let us therefore become just someone who fights for improving our conditions without looking to revolutionary conclusions. And it's this trajectory that we've been on all along that made it important for us to pull together this tribunal around reparations, that to actually talk about the genocide and how the United States was actually moving in a way that violated the Convention of the United Nations on Genocide, that we were the ones who did this, and therefore November 13th, 1982, we found ourselves in Brooklyn, New York, at this incredible tribunal with some of the most incredible forces who represent the struggle of our people from different arenas, and pulled it all together so that we can have a comprehensive, a coherent kind of statement about the conditions of African people that helped everybody in the world to understand that genocide was committed against African people. Reparations are due to African people. We took it out of these closed discussions or narrow discussions that was contained within mostly nationalist movements, et cetera. We took it out and took it to the masses of the people to bring the masses into this discussion and understanding around reparations. We understood clearly that if reparations were to occur, it was going to be a consequence, as a consequence of it being embraced and grasped by the people. We had to turn reparations, we said, into a household word. Everybody had to know about reparations. And this is what was going to advance our struggle. And this was also in recognition that when they killed Malcolm, when they killed King, when they killed members of the Black Panther Party and what have you, when they killed the struggle against colonialism, they also were aiming at the ideas, the philosophy, the ideology of our movement. And that was something that was designed to push us back. And so we had to resurrect all of this. We had to bring it back to the surface. Our people were on the, generally speaking, on the defensive. The whole line that nasty, insulting line that's similar to what they're saying about us, the African People Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement, being led by Russians, that we don't have enough sense and intelligence as a people to understand our circumstances and move to rectify this relationship we have with oppression. The whole line at this time was that somehow all the Black people were living off the welfare of all the white people whose generosity had been taxed to the limit, and that they were tired of taking care of Black people, et cetera, and the whole African population, because this became the dominant feature, because there were no longer offices of the Black Panther Party, offices of revolutionary organizations and communities throughout the country talking directly to our people. Then the ones who were talking directly to our people were the ones they put up for us, these forces who they put out to replace us, and the government itself. And the government was articulating this line that it was generosity of white people that was taking care of us. Now suddenly, after this brutal battles that especially rose to the surface during the 1950s, when peoples around the world everywhere saw mobs of white people attacking children. They saw churches being bombed. They saw high-powered water hoses from fire departments being used against young people just because they wanted to register to join Joe Biden's organization, the Democratic Party. And so this was the stuff that had been pushed aside, and now the African population was defined as a criminal population. We're all criminals, and so suddenly this group of people, this heroic population of the African people in this country who fought for, who rescued any concept of democracy that had existed in this country, who rescued it, who said that people have a right to vote, people have a right to assembly, people should be able to go to church without being murdered, who go to school to be educated. The people who were doing this were now characterized as the criminals. And the criminals who were killing Black people, et cetera, were now the good guys who were rescuing America from the depravity of Black people. So this is what we went up against. And this is why it was so important to do this and other tribunals. So this was the first of the world tribunals. We did something like 12 tribunals. Once a year, we were doing a tribunal everywhere, taking it throughout the country. In this instance, I mean the United States. And actually, I left the United States almost immediately after this tribunal. I traveled to Europe. I took to African communities throughout England. I was everywhere in England. I was in Paris, France, with the reparations demand. I was in Ireland, Northern Ireland, meeting with other people who had been living under British colonialism for something like 800 years. White people taking this question of reparations, genocide against African people. And it's important to mention that just because Here we find ourselves in 2022 being accused by the United States government of suddenly coming to the employ of Russians to go out and charge the United States with genocide. This is obviously ridiculous, but I just wanted to make those statements. And now summation. And I hope I haven't exercised too much of the time that I have to deal with the summation, but here we are. And this summation made again at the World Tribunal. This would have been on, I guess, on the November 14th, the second day of the tribunal, I would imagine. So sisters and brothers, Africans and peoples of the world, we've heard the testimony of some of the finest representatives of our people. We've heard testimony which confirms, like nothing other than our very existence confirms, greatness, the greatness of this people who brought civilization to this earth and who, it is very clear, have the responsibility to bring civilization back to the face of this earth. This is an objective responsibility independent of the will of those of us in this room. We've heard testimony and there has been introduced documentation that shows that it is the oppression of African people here and throughout the world, which is the very foundation, the cornerstone of the existence of this terrible world economic system that causes destruction throughout this earth. Such being the case, it is very clear that if you remove the cornerstone, buildings will come tumbling down. This is in no way an attempt to refute the struggle of the various peoples around the world and the need to be in solidarity with them. It's just like any structure and building. If you want to take it down, there are several routes. You can take it down brick by brick, or you can target the cornerstone and snatch it out, and the entire building comes down. African people, the oppression of African people, the continuing oppression of African people, which every reactionary oppressive force on the face of the earth is in unity with. Is in unity to maintain. African people, our oppression, which has never ended, which has been continuous, and which has operated on various fronts at the same time, represent the cornerstone, and at the same time the weakest link in this imperialist country, this imperialist world. Therefore, the judgment which comes from a tribunal such as this is very, very important. Someone may think that to be able to make such a statement as this statement, to be able to make a statement as those statements made by these jurors represent partiality or biasness. Such a person thinking such a thing would be absolutely correct. But to say that it represents biasness is not to say that it represents unjustness or injustice. It is recognized that all institutions are given birth by the societies from which they are developing. If you live in a situation in any country, whether there is a court, there is a police force, an army, a bank, or what have you, that exists in that situation, you will have the nature of the society that it comes from. All of that will have the nature of that society. If you live in a country or world that is built on slavery, barbarity, thievery, genocide, the institutions of that society in any place in the world will be there for the purpose of sustaining the enslavement and the genocide. There's the bourgeois courts in this society that is the court of the slave masters, of the ruling class. There have been continuous attempts to prove objectivity when they take us there before lynching us legally. If they don't lynch us on the streets, like so many people testified in the last 2 days. But what they do when they talk about objectivity is attempt to obscure the nature of the institutions themselves. And the fact that these institutions cannot but be about maintaining that which gave it birth, that which enriches it, that which keeps the powerful powerful and the powerless powerless. For today, in the last 2 days, we have set about creating another institution, and this institution at this juncture of history does not have a permanent place to rest except in us. And this institution is the World Tribunal, which brought the United States government for the first time in its history to trial for the crime of people in this country. And this tribunal is a biased tribunal. It is a tribunal that moves on the assumption that Black people must be free, and that anything that stands in the way of that liberation must be removed. We are biased. This World Tribunal stands in opposition to virtually every court that exists in this country. There are opposing and contending forces. This World Tribunal stands in opposition to the United States Supreme Court. They are opposing and contending forces. One represents the powerful and oppressive. One represents the oppressed and those who are determined to be free. It is a biased tribunal. It does not attempt to represent the interests of those who are the oppressors. There is no such objectivity in the face of the earth. Some pretend that there is such objectivity. We don't pretend. And if only for that reason, with all of its biasness, this court is a much more just court than those courts which exist in this country. I must say that one very important difference we are confronted with here is that we must not take the holding of state power lightly. It is the possession of state power by our oppressors that makes them able to carry out their oppressive will. When we talk about state power, we talk about control of the courts, the police, the army, the navy. We are talking about an apparatus that has the ability to coerce, to force people to do what they want done. We must not take lightly the notion of state power. We don't have state power at this time, but we have the capacity for revolutionary people's power. And the question that is before us today, the question that is more important, or that will give significance to everything that any witness stated here, more significance than any solidarity shown and not shown by those who did not have the courage to come and act as judges. The most significant thing that's going to give meaning to any of this, to the risk of life and liberty of those international jurors who sit here, because they face tyrants where they come from, tyrants that are upheld by this government. The thing that will give meaning is that what we do upon leaving this building. If this court and this verdict is going to be recognized as anything as having meaning in the world, it will be because of those who are here, who are in here. Take it out to the world, understanding its meaning and understanding its legality and forcing everybody to recognize this legality. Let me tell you something. We started off this tribunal giving a history of the solidarity that African people have given to every revolutionary force in this world. We started off building for this tribunal with promises of solidarity from virtually every revolutionary force in this world. Look at what is here with us in terms of the judges and world observers. They know the power of U.S. imperialism. We must teach them the power of international solidarity. We shall teach them the power of international solidarity by the forcefulness of the focus that our revolutionary movement in this country finally has. Reparations is a demand whose time has come. Therefore, we can sum it up very easily for anybody, whatever nationality, anybody who presupposes that they are friends of Black people in this country. Do you support the judgment which came from the World Tribunal on reparations for Black people? One, and what is your position on the demand by 40 million Black people in the United States for reparations now? The thing that will give meaning to everything that has happened in this room for the last 2 days is our willingness and our capacity to make everybody have to answer that question, everybody. I can't talk about the importance of this for too long. Our international allies have accepted the definition of the white ruling class of the world for who we are and our significance all over the world. I'm telling you what I know. I can tell you revolutionary countries where I've visited. I've watched Tarzan on television. So now we tell the world, our allies, objectively speaking, are our objective allies. Some people are our allies objectively and are just too dumb to know it subjectively. What we have to do is educate them. We call it positive criticism. What's your stand on reparations for Black people? We say the movement has a focus. We don't ask you what your position on housing. We don't ask about your position on busing. Frankly, we don't give a damn. What's your position on reparations? What's your position on the $4.1 trillion? That's just in wages. We'll get to the damages later. What's your position, senora, compañera? However you say it, that's the question that has to be raised. On tomorrow, the 15th and 16th, we'll be pulling together the beginning of the African National Reparations Organization. That's going to be a part of taking this demand out into the world. We have a long process to be involved in terms of bringing all this testimony and organizing it and putting it out in the world. I'm not exactly sure what methods are going to be used yet. Our party has a minor capacity at publishing. I'm not quite sure what that means in terms of how we do it. I'm hoping that this reparations organization that we create will have the ability to take on that task. There's a publishing company in England which has written when they knew that this tribunal was going to happen, suggesting that it would be willing to publish these proceedings. I want to tell you that one of the things that's even made compiling this edition of the World Tribunal is that shortly afterwards, the tribunal and all the evidence was located in the home headquarters of Carmet's sister, Queen Mother Dorothy Lewis. And the fire mysteriously happened and burned, torched much of it. So there's a lot of stuff that we don't have right now because it was burned accidentally. We have to say, I mean, we didn't see who did it. We just have our suspicions. But we got more evidence of that reality than those people who attacked our homes on July 29th had about our complicity working under the leadership of Russians. In fact, there's far more evidence in terms of history of the FBI attacking Black people than Russians directing Black people. Then the reparations organization must be created to take it out in the world. Then these international sisters and brothers from various places where African people have been dispersed have to take it back and unite our brothers and sisters around the world with this demand, because it's quiet as it's kept. For legal purposes, we are targeting the United States, USA right now, but the US government and all of Europe understand the implications of a single nigger anywhere on the face of the earth demanding reparations. James Brown made a song about it called The Big Payback. United Nations. The brother said a little about its structure and its inherent injustice. It is an unjust, undemocratic organization. And the US has proved itself to be the most undemocratic of them all. Here's a country preaching democracy all over the world. And you hear this ugly human being, Kirkpatrick is her name. You see this nauseating criminal, false species of a human being acting like a fool, talking about because people voted against the United States, that's in the United Nations, voted against Israel, quote, if you don't do what we say, we're gonna take all the cash from the important programs and take medical aid in peoples around the world. That take, in theory, food growing techniques to people around the world. If you vote against this bastion of democracy, says we'll take the money away, we'll starve you to death, we'll make this organization collapse. This was Kirkpatrick. So we start a rearguard action with all the oppressed peoples around the world who don't have possession of state power. If you're as eager to leave as you say you are, then we'll demand that you go because of the treatment of Black people in the United States. And we'll demand of our allies and people who say they support our struggle that they demand that the U.S. go. There was a great man once whose name was Chairman Mao. He said, U.S. imperialism ain't nothing but a paper tiger. And here we have people of the world quivering because of a punk organization like the U.S. saying we'll pull out. And you know it's a punk organization because every time we fought back against it, we won. Only time we lose is when we don't fight. Every question that surrounds Black political prisoners and prisoners of war would be recognized as a just and righteous demand by the United Nations, the World Court, any court, depending on what we do. Assata Shakur is welcome here, depending on what we do. There should be no place and no Black community anywhere in this country that a Sundiata Acoli can't come. And there should be no one that is not willing to do the kind of work that makes it possible for Sundiata Acoli to come there. What we do, we should never allow anybody else to take them as those revolutionary men and women whose difference from the rest of us, from us, is that they dared at the critical juncture in history to put their bodies on the line in the struggle for freedom and justice for Black people. If we, those of us in this room, take this stand outside this room, we legalize it ourselves. States give themselves legality. What do you think impose legality on the United States government? Do you believe that garbage that the Israelites talk about, that they went up on top of the mountain and the great hand wrote something on a piece of stone and sent it down by Moses? No, states give themselves power, so the people must have power. And the people must indicate that we confer upon the people ourselves the revolutionary power to carry out the will of this world tribunal. If you don't do it, there won't be no freedom, and this tribunal will be meaningless. I'm hoping that one of the things that can come out of the African National Reparations Organization is the creation of a permanent tribunal. Some people may have the most mercenary interest in reparations. Whatever the interest, if you intend to collect, you're going to have to keep tabs on the damages done. So we need a permanent tribunal established, and we need to confer, African people need to confer on the African National Reparations Organization that is to be built, the right, the duty, the obligation to establish a permanent international tribunal to monitor the treatment of African people in this country. We have to do that, in my opinion. That's not to liquidate a lot of other things which are going to happen. I'm sure, for example, there's going to be sometime shortly after this tribunal a convening of some international jurors of some repute who will take the documentation, the testimony, the indictments that we have made, who will review it, who will initiate legal opinions, legal writings, which is part of a legal effort to introduce the outcome here to the body of international jurisprudence, which is very important. On the legal front, we will do that. We will hopefully initiate some movements throughout the Black American Law Students Association, understanding the protracted nature of our struggle, catching them there, tying them up with the implications of the World Tribunal and demand for reparations, and hopefully building something among the Black law students in this country so that they can have an opportunity to use the law, which comes from the state in the interest of the aspirations of Black people in this country, by contributing to this precedent in international law that we are talking about. There are other things that I am sure will come out of this African National Reparations Organization. But in the last analysis, it will be we who will free us. It will be Black people willing to take on the task at hand, which will be responsible for our liberation. For most of us, I'm sure that's not shocking at all. Most of us understand exactly what our struggle is about. We have had 2 days of testimony, which I suspect has probably resulted in the most concentrated amount of documentation and information on the struggle and history of Black people in this country that has been amassed in a very long time, if ever before. it's meaningful to call attention to that, because, as you know, there's this HR, House Resolution 40, that's been fought for, that actually calls for some kind of study on the demand for reparation. We're saying right here the study's been done. It was done in November 13th and 14th in Brooklyn, New York, by a reputable tribunal established by Black people ourselves. If nothing else, it seems to this people's advocate that one thing that we should have perceived from all of the testimony that's been presented is the absolute necessity for Black people to make our struggle on our own terms. When I say make our struggle on our own terms, I mean in the most important way. That part of those terms must be ideological. That is, we must control the ideas that motivate those who would make revolutionary struggle in the interest of Black people, those who define rule, those who define rule. You may call them what you will. Anybody who's defining for Black people in this country in the last analysis are those who are making the determination for Black people in this country. Anybody who any place on the face of the earth who has someone else making determinations for them are a people who are living in bondage. We must take that, make that determination. We had that determination in our hands up until the late 1960s and early 1970s. Our movement was attacked viciously. And we heard some of the testimony about that. It was attacked viciously. It was a method the CIA had first attempted in Vietnam, but failed. It was a method that which in South Vietnam was called the Phoenix Program. The idea of the Phoenix Program was to decapitate the leadership of the revolutionary movement in South Vietnam. The CIA murdered, assassinated, and this is documented, 39,000 cadre of the National Liberation Front in South Vietnam in an attempt to decapitate that movement, to crush the people's struggle to be free. In the United States of America, the United States government used the same Phoenix Program. It decapitated the Black liberation movement. Everywhere you looked up, Black people who stood on the side of freedom and justice and socialist democracy for Black people found themselves either in prison all over this country or underground. But they, the US, had learned something from Vietnam, that it's not enough to merely to decapitate a movement by killing its leaders. Fred Hampton said it very well. You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution. And so that what happened to our communities in the late 60s and 70s is that someone else began to define for us ideologically other than ourselves. Much of that someone who defined for us ideologically other than ourselves characterized itself as the white left. And this was one front of struggle that we were involved in. The last most important part of this movement we've been involved in for the last 10 years has been a fight to take control of our own movement, once again, from those who call themselves our allies. Now, if nothing else, I think this tribunal shows us the very need, the absolute need to control our own movement. To control our own movement. Final remarks. There are enough North Americans in this country who say they are friends of the struggle of Black people. There's a representative of one of the best of the North American working class here, who has put forth this understanding, his understanding of the tremendous task that is ahead in order to win the North American working class. It too must accept the Black liberation movement on our own terms. It cannot set terms for us. This left, listen to me, sisters and brothers, because this is very important. We've got to walk out of here with this. This left says it's for redistribution of wealth. Don't you hear it said all the time? We're for redistribution of the wealth. We must say this to the left, so are we. We want $4.1 trillion. And all the struggles that you're involved in, where you say you're talking about Black folks, you've got to raise the demand for reparations. If they don't raise the demand for reparations, we're supposed to call them funny names. This left that saw 1 million people spend $1 million on a march, a picnic against the so-called nuclear war, when Black people in this country have a lifespan which is on the average 7 years shorter than white people in this country. And they're worried about a nuclear war when the people of El Salvador are dying like flies from the imperialist power of this country. They're talking about nuclear war. Those people who are interested in that campaign, they tell us this thing. They put forth slogans like money for social programs, not for bombs and war. They say that the money going for nuclear armaments and armaments generally is money that should be going into programs for the people. We say, we agree. We want $4.1 trillion reparations. And the next time 1 million of you walk down the streets in New York, raise the demand of reparations for Black people. Not a single dollar for a single bullet. $4.1 trillion for Black people in the United States for 400 years of oppression. Black folks don't like to deal with white folks in the white left. Ain't nothing wrong with dealing with nobody if you do it on your own terms. Establish your terms. This World Tribunal has established the terms. The African National Reparations Organization will establish the terms. And yes, we'll talk to the anti-nuke movement about $4.1 trillion. The next time there's a march down the streets in New York, if they don't have no banners calling for reparations for Black people, they might have to fight us to get to where they're going. I say that in all honesty and seriousness, sisters and brothers. We are talking about the possibility of they are talking about the possibility of nuclear accidents, nuclear war. Do you know that there are people around the world who would dance in the streets if a nuclear accident took this monster off the map? Do you know that there are people around the world who would shout to the heavens if a nuclear accident took this monster off the map? The North American population, the working class included, must be able to recognize that it's going to have to unite with the masses of the peoples of the world, that it has consciously or otherwise united with its own ruling class. And every victory around the world against U.S. imperialism, because of their false unity and false identification, puts their back up against the wall. And if the North American working class keeps its back up against the wall in the face of struggles of the peoples of the world, if it keeps its back up against the wall, how in the hell is it going to read the writing that's on the wall? It won't be able to read the writing that's on the wall. So what has to happen is we have to make a struggle on every level. If there's a Negro politician running for office anywhere, ask him about the decision of this World Tribunal. Make him say, yeah, I think it's legal. It's right. You've got to do it, but do it in public. Don't whisper with your little letters to him. Ask him at the next meeting where he's having questions. Congressman, what's your position on the World Tribunal? Make these Negro people who live off the blood of Black people who struggles, the masses struggle, made it possible for them to be Dr. So-and-so. These parasites who don't work for a living but make their living off teaching us how to pray, make them say they unite with the outcome of this tribunal and with the demand for reparation. When your liberal politician comes through your community, you've got to put it to the sucker. Well, what is your position on the World Tribunal reparations for Black people? It came to certain particular conclusions about the United States and the oppression of Black people. Do you agree with them? What is your position on the demand for reparations for Black people in this country? In other words, I'm saying Black people are supposed to be given the direction to white people, not the Russians giving directions to Black people. And then there are other things that will happen too, but most importantly, this thing about the World Tribunal must be taken out into the world. It must be made legal in the sense that the masses of Black people and other peoples of the world understand it. If you do that, sisters and brothers, there ain't nothing that we can do wrong making this revolution. I'm going to just clarify that and end. There are some Black people who are being chased and some are dead. Some are on the ground, ostensibly because they were involved in a robbery of a Brinks truck. This government has been able to paint those men and women as criminals. They call them robbers. There are people on the west coast of California who've been organizing in the prisons and in the Black communities. This government is able to paint them as criminals. If you take this out into the world, if we take this World Tribunal and its conclusions out into the world, we clarify who the criminals are. And in addition to clarifying who the criminals are, if a Brink truck should be expropriated, everybody understands that a revolution needs funds. Nobody's going to have no problem with that. what's 1.6 million compared to 4.1 trillion? If we take this out into the world, they can't take a person like they did in the 60s and bring them before the courts and say, well, these people killed policemen in their communities while they were talking about freedom, and get away with it. Because if they take this, if you take this out and make it legal in the eyes of the people of the world, and you understand that it's our just struggle, that then everybody else will understand that the oppressor sometimes and in most and as often as possible will have to die for the oppressed to be free. Nobody holds it against the Vietnamese people for having killed the Americans when they came there raiding their country. No rational person on the face of the earth, because the people of the world recognize that the Vietnamese struggle is a just struggle. I shall tell you this, that it was the oppression and enslavement of African people in this world that gave birth to U.S. capitalism and world imperialism, that the first crime that was committed by imperialism was committed against Black people, that we are the oldest victims of imperialism in the world, and that there cannot possibly be any struggle more just than the revolutionary struggle of African people here or anywhere on the face of the earth. I would like to thank these great African people for coming out and making this possible. I would like to thank Sister Queen Mother Moore for being a living example in 1982, that we have to fight from generation to generation. I would like to give a special appreciation to our panel of international jurors and ask Black people again to remember what came out of this testimony, out of this World Tribunal today, because there was one other thing that came out of it, that we've got the same problems, same struggles everywhere. Black people are located. And that being the case, sisters and brothers, you and African people throughout the world must demand that we unite this struggle around the world. You must demand it. You must not allow any nigga anywhere on the face of the earth to stand up and say they stand for Black people and they ain't united in some practical organizational way. You must demand it. We don't want no more discussions about Pan-Africanism. We want a demonstration of practical organizational unity that's coordinating this revolutionary struggle of Black people around the world. If we ain't willing to do that, then we shouldn't be standing up talking about no unity among Black people. That's what Marcus Garvey said. Does somebody want to call him a lie? He said, Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad. That was the only internationalism in that period of 1917, when the European Communist International collapsed in the face of their national chauvinism. It was Garvey and the Black movement around this world that that held up the internationalism for the world to see. And it was that movement that was moved on by imperialism all around the world. I'd like to thank our official observers for coming here and being with us. And with that, sisters and brothers, Africans and peoples of the world, this World Tribunal on Reparations for Black people in the United States is officially adjourned. Thank you. They say cut back, we say pay back. Reparations now. Uhuru. I'm going to briefly read the epilogue. That's something that was written for this particular publication. And here it is. The 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations for African People was a crowning touch in the campaign of the African People's Socialist Party to take the reparations issue out of the shadows and make reparations a household word. The fact that reparations is today an issue that has captured the imagination of Africans and the colonially oppressed around the world is testimony of the success of our campaign of the World Tribunal. The World Tribunal established a template for how the issue of reparations would be pursued and perceived. From that November date in 1982 up to now, appeared where in the U.S. reparations was debated during the campaign for the Democratic Party nomination for U.S. president, first in 2008 and more seriously in 2016, when more than one candidate felt it politically expedient to unite with some version of our demand for reparations. However, the work to establish the political legitimacy of the reparations demand was arduous and extended beyond the tribunal. The Burning Spear, the official journal of the African People's Socialist Party, reported extensively on some of this work over the years. As we can see from the article in the May 1983 issue, the African People's Socialist Party initiated the World Tribunal on Reparations for African People in the U.S. as part of our active attempt to solve the problems left to us by the government's military defeat of the African Revolution in the 1960s. This is something that I must emphasize. Clearly, the 1982 Reparations Tribunal was far more than just another political event. The influence of the tribunal was profound and is still being, and is still felt today. Our primary objective then, as it is now, was to advance the revolutionary struggle of the Africans to restore the colonial domination of our people and continent. We have always fought to win total liberation under the leadership of the African working class, as embodied in the African People's Socialist Party, its vanguard, or advanced detachment. We had to restore a recognized leadership for our struggle against U.S. domestic colonialism. As part of the process of re-achieving ideological coherence for the overall thrust against U.S. domestic colonialism, our party advanced a strategic aim of promoting the general leadership of the anti-colonial movement among the masses of our people, as opposed to the leadership of the Democratic Party. African petty bourgeoisie, or white left. This meant putting forward a general bloc of forces led by the party that would function objectively as opponents to the humiliating and ideological defeatist politics of assimilationism or anti-racism. That's one of the reasons we object to this whole concept of being like the black left. I mean, what is the black left? What does that mean, the black left? That's defining ourselves in relations. It's, somebody else is the left, right? And we are the black version of white identity. No. We are not the black left. We are a revolutionary anti-colonial movement, just like the Cubans are not the Cuban left. The Vietnamese were not the Vietnamese left. They had an objective to overturn the left and the right of colonialism. That's the relations. That's what we have. So, and that's why it's so humiliating. It's just built into it conceptually how people think. You know how they used to refer to Dick Gregory when he was as the white, whatever the white man's name, who was supposed to be a comedian, etc. So we are always the black version of the white people. We are the what they call us, the hyphenated persons. We are the African Americans. So you have African Americans, you have Mexican Americans, and then you have Americans, right? Nobody says that the white people are the white Americans or the French Americans. You don't hear the French Americans or the German Americans and things like that. We are some reflection of whiteness, some reflection of the real force in the world. We are some imitation of this. That's why we have no agency. They can't perceive of us having agency. The FBI, all of them, they destroy concept of agency. Even people who are revolutionaries in our own movements can understand the concept that African people have to assume the responsibility of winning our power. There are people who are locked into the notion that somehow the Russians are going to free us. And you got to recognize Russia and China and Africa, that they're different. Yes, they're different. But the real fundamental problem is not whether Russia or China is going to treat us well. It's whether we have the power to define who we are, who we will deal with, and what terms that happens. Whether Russian, Chinese, or anybody else, that's our responsibility. We have to have agency. That's difficult for conceptually. When you talk about when you have this discussion about the superstructure, the ideas that flows from this economic system born of oppression, exploitation of African and colonized peoples around the world, it's hard for people to even perceive. Sometimes those of us who are victimized by it, to perceive. Somebody talked about how, I think Dick Gregory, Dick Gregory made the joke about how, during this whole civil rights thing and the Birmingham bus, boycott in Birmingham, and finally Black people won the right to ride on the front of the bus. And some Black people actually was driving the bus. So this this bus pulled up and some white people were getting ready to get on the bus and they saw a black driver and said, oh, the niggas done stole the bus. You understand? So this whole thing about black people being in charge, it was just hard, you know, for them to be able to deal with, and hard for Africans to deal with too, you know. The World Tribunal was held, excuse me. The World Tribunal was held 10 years after the 1972 founding of our party in St. Petersburg, Florida, and slightly more than a year after our party's first Congress held in September 1981 in Oakland, California. Our party was founded with the oft-stated objective to complete the Black Revolution of the 1960s that had been militarily defeated by an array of international colonialist forces operating under the strategic and sometimes immediate leadership of the U.S. government. At the time of the tribunal, the U.S. government was engaged in a reactionary rampage to crush the progress of the colonial struggle within the United States and throughout the world under the regime of U.S. President Ronald Wilson Reagan. Reagan continues to be one of the most beloved U.S. presidents. He won the U.S. presidency in 1980 against the incumbent with his promise to a dispirited U.S. He won the U.S. presidency in 1980 against an incumbent with his promises to a dispirited U.S. colonial population that he would push back the global advances of the colonized throughout the world, from El Salvador, Iran, Panama, and within the U.S. It was Reagan who coined the term, "Make America Great Again." The anti-colonial revolutionary forces within the U.S. had experienced U.S. colonial government sanctioned murder of our leaders, systematic destruction of anti-colonial organization, imprisonment and dispersal of now leaderless militants, and ideological coherence among a colonized population that had only recently brought U.S. colonialism to its knees ideologically and politically. This is the context within which the African People's Socialist Party conducted the first ever trial of the U.S. government by its colonized subjects. The popularity of Ronald Wilson Reagan as a presidential candidate and then president was accompanied and influenced by perennial ideological assaults on colonized African people. These were sometimes led by Reagan himself, who promoted the popular notion of African people being welfare queens or wastrels who misused the generosity of the colonial welfare state. This picture of the oppressed and starved African colonial subjects was promoted by nearly all the colonial media and soon overwhelmed any remnants of the memory of Africans in the U.S. being murdered and mutilated for simply attempting to go to school or register to vote in colonial education. For many of the colonizers, this was a splendid way to absolve themselves of any responsibility for the general conditions of existence the World Tribunal would expose in 1982. Our party saw the reparations demand as something that once won among the masses of our people would clarify which group was really living off the welfare of the other. The demand would help to provide the material basis for our theory of African internationalism, a theory that revolves around an understanding of the parasitic relationship between Africans and Europeans, including those who call themselves Americans. This is the historical unity of opposites located within the world encompassing colonial mode of production. This is the historical unity of opposites. The reparations demand and the World Tribunal was to contribute to practical unity within the general anti-colonial movement around the demand which we all claim to unite. This unity would be deepened by the ongoing collective work that would take place within the African National Reparations Organization that was on the agenda to be created and led by the entire pro-independence and anti-colonial movement immediately following the tribunal. From the beginning, the African People's Socialist Party understood reparations as a function of the revolution. As one comrade recently put it, this is Comrade Aronde, by the way, quote, after the revolution, we'll pay reparations to ourselves. but it was a demand we wanted every colonized African within the United States to adopt, regardless of ideological persuasion or location within the colonial class structure. From our perspective, the objective at the time was to win the legitimacy of the reparations demand among the African population in general, win it among the masses, regardless of class, and the demand itself, as an expression of African internationalist revolutionary theory, becomes a material force. It is the responsibility of the party as the advanced detachment to use the political momentum gained by general acceptance of the demand to take the people to revolutionary conclusions beyond the limitations of the African petty bourgeoisie and other opportunists. It is the responsibility of the advanced detachment to mobilize the people behind the battering ram of reparations to open the door to seizure of Black power by the African working class. We changed the way reparations would be viewed by Africans in the world. The process contributing to that change is revealed throughout our World Tribunal, the institutions that established a template for mass reparations work. In fact, it was the party that took the reparations demand from this in-house discussion, recognized by only a handful of African groups and personalities. When we formally took up the reparations demand during the party's first Congress, reparations was spoken of by most adherents as a payment for some of the value of stolen labor during colonial slavery. It was the party that extended the reparations demand to encompass U.S. culpability for all the conditions of life imposed on Africans. And as we showed during the tribunal, the rate of exploitation of African labor alone grew greater subsequent to former colonial slavery. In 1988, 6 years after the First World Tribunal, U.S. President Ronald Wilson Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act that would confer reparations to more than 100,000 Japanese who were interned in concentration camps during the Second Imperialist World War. Despite the fact that many of the people had never seen Japan or had done nothing to suggest they were disloyal to the United States, the properties were stolen from them by U.S. white settlers, and they were imprisoned with no meaningful opposition by white colonial U.S. citizens. It's worth noting that a white left organization at the time that had Japanese members used its Japanese members to actually convince the Japanese population, to help convince the Japanese population to go into the concentration camps. That's your left. Ronald Reagan's signature on the Civil Liberties Act did serve to convince sectors of the self-defined pro-independence, anti-colonial African organizations that the party had unsuccessfully attempted to win as participants in the tribunal and enroll, that reparations were indeed possible through the goodwill of the U.S. colonial government. That's what Reagan did. Reagan did that. We had initiated this. Reagan signed the bill. Ronald Reagan, Make America Great Again, who won the popularity from all the white people in this country because he's going to take Panama back from home, right? Because James Earl Carter, who was the Democrat who preceded him in power, had recognized he had to concede that Panama was something that should be in the authority of the Panamanians, because otherwise it's just another contradiction that they had to deal with inside this country. And so when he did this, part of Reagan's whole campaign, Make America Great Again thing, was he's going to take Panama back, from this kind of nonsense. And so this is the Reagan. When he signs this thing for reparations for Japanese, then this has made believers out of all these people who before had said they believed in reparations, but would not work with the African People's Socialist Party, because it's a class question that's always, class struggle is raging within the struggle for national liberation. So in 1989, 7 years following the founding of the World Tribunal and ENRO, events which transformed the reparations demand into a mass demand under the leadership of the advanced detachment of the African working class, the organization that would eventually be called the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations was hurriedly pulled together to reap whatever rewards there were to be achieved through the U.S. legislature or other arms of the colonial government. There's a whole different an approach here. This is not, like an attack on N'Cobra or something. N'Cobra, was one of the first in 2022 who came out in defense of the party after this assault by the U.S. government. What I'm saying is that we had tried to work with those folks who led the thing to develop N'Cobra, to bring them into this process that would have built this tribunal that I'm talking about now, and the African National Reparations Organization that would have united all the anti-colonial organizations in the African community into a single thing to fight for reparations. They didn't do it. And they didn't do it precisely because this movement was led by the African working class. And later they were able to do this, but it's a different trajectory. On the one hand, we are saying the power is in the people. That's why we held a tribunal. The power is in that's why we said it's not good enough for work that good people were doing around the reparations. I should say work that people were doing around the adherence of reparation. They pre-existed before the party. But the way that work was being done, and also contained within small circles of nationalists, et cetera. And then, and sometimes working with right-wing white nationalists, sometimes working directly with right-wing white nationalists who wanted to see Africans succeed here because they themselves were involved in a project that was splitting the United States territorially into different sectors. One sector for the white people, one sector for the indigenous people, one sector for et cetera, et cetera. So some of those folk united with the reparations demand. So we had all kinds of people who were doing work around reparations. But it was not a mass movement. Never was it a mass movement until we built it as a mass movement. We took it out to the people. So it was not something that some very smart people who had developed legal briefs and stuff like that, who were prepared to take it to court, or who were prepared to go before certain national and international legislators. It wasn't, we took it away from that, gave it to the people, said that the people are the determining factors, and we shall make reparations a household word, and that the people are the fundamental thing. That's what we did. And that's why we couldn't get any support, because of the lack of confidence among the masses. And Reagan, the white nationalist Ronald Wilson Reagan, the white nationalist Make America Great Again Reagan, the white nationalist who was going to take Panama back, the white nationalist who was determined that the people in El Salvador would not extend the revolution that was happening in Nicaragua. The white nationalists that killed so many people in Nicaragua after they had kicked out Somoza, the one who presided over that country for colonialism. He said he's going to give reparations to the Japanese, and therefore they saw the possibilities, right? And that possibility is not lay with the masses of the people. That possibility lay with winning support from the United States government. That was the approach. That's how the approach differed. And that's the thing. We said reparations has to be a function of the revolution, right? Theirs was a function of solving problems. We even had, instances. I won't try to go into that. But so one person who couldn't face me when somebody said in public that he was the father of the reparations movement in this country, had actually put together things talking about working with the police in Washington, D.C. in this march, that they were fighting against dope pushers in the community. By the way, speaking of dope pushers, we're going to be showing here in St. Louis, the Uhura House. They cloned Tyrone. For anybody who's located here can come. We're going to look at that and deal with it, because the dope pushers, they are much smarter than this guy who we characterized as the father of the reparation movement, right? So he was characterized as the father of the reparation movement. He was talking about working with the police department to take the streets back from the dope pushers. Like the dope pushers control the streets. We know who controlled the streets. The one who had a knee in the neck, of George Floyd, controlled the police all around this country. And if it looks otherwise, it's because people who call themselves revolutionaries are not working in these streets to organize people to bring them onto the side of themselves in the revolution. Anyway, I got to move. The African People's Socialist Party always recognized that the demand for reparations had to be won among the masses of African people. It is not enough for clever African lawyers and colonized legislators to simply pursue the reparations demand as individuals within the sanctity of the colonial state structure, separate from the purifying independent participation of masses of African people, especially the African working class. This distinction is responsible for the opportunist move to form in Cobra only after reparations were approved for the Japanese by the regime of U.S. President Ronald Wilson Reagan. There could have been no better statement of belief in the colonial state by these forces, as opposed to a belief in the power of the people as exemplified by the work of the African People's Socialist Party. For 11 years after the World Tribunal, NRO, the organization built by our party as the first mass organization created specifically for the pursuit of the reparations demand among African people, held reparations tribunals in various cities throughout the United States, continuously expanding the ideological base for the reparations demand. In 1985, the African People's Solidarity Committee, APSC, our party organization, assigned to open a new front of our anti-colonial struggle within the white colonial population, made reparations work its primary work. Through APSC, the African People's Socialist Party has been relentless in pushing and winning the reparations demand among a growing sector of the colonizers. APSC mass organization, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, USM, has an active presence today in at least 140 cities and 30 states within the United States. In 2017, the reparations demand became part of an electoral campaign for the first time in history in the United States when two party-sponsored candidates, Akile Anayi and Jesse Neville, ran for city council and mayor, respectively, in St. Petersburg, Florida, under the slogan, Unity Through Reparations. Our candidates did not win the election in St. Petersburg, where Africans constitute less than 22% of the population. Nevertheless, our campaign reverberated far and wide-reaching contributions from Africans from throughout the United States, as well as some from international sources that had to be returned. We lost the election of 2017 and again in 2019, but the colonial establishment was concerned enough that U.S. President Barack Hussein Obama broke with his tradition up to that point of not endorsing local Democratic Party candidates and actually endorsed our anti-reparations opponents in St. Petersburg, Florida. That's your guy. That's your guy. What's his name? Barack what, say it again? Barack Hussein. Barack, yeah, I didn't say insane. Barack Hussein Obama did that. Our participation in the race on a reparation platform caused a split in the local ruling Democratic Party and resulted in some of its white local leadership resigning their posts to join our campaign. That literally happened in St. Petersburg, Florida. Shortly afterwards, several heavyweight Democratic Party presidents, you don't read about that in none of the bourgeois publications. You don't read about it in the white left publications or anything like that. That happened. That's struggle on the ground in the real world. So we say shortly afterwards, several heavyweight Democratic Party candidates were compelled to put reparations on their campaign platform thanks to the influence of our party in the electoral arena around the demand for reparations, because it reveals clearly that the reparations saying that had gained such traction in the African community that they could not leave it just to Africans discuss and say what it was about. So they put it on their campaign. They talked about reparations. I think even Kamala Harris had to come out for reparations and what happened. And she, of course, is vice president in theory for Joe Biden, who came out what? Against reparations. This is the turmoil and contradictions that been exposed through the work we've done. So this then is what we mean when we say the World Tribunal and our party established a template for the struggle for reparations. and has become so fashionable after our party threw our body on the political grenade to advance the struggle at a time when it was considered a position of a lunatic fringe by white left colonizers in the U.S. Threw our body on the grenade and the flashbang grenade. So, the significance of the 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations for African People in the U.S. continues to reverberate within the contours of the African liberation movement in every place on earth to which the African nation was forced to disperse in the process of establishing the colonial mode of production, not by accident. The content of Reparations Now, even prior to the inclusion of much of the testimony found in this updated version, is profound for what it reveals about the unfolding events during an important period of our struggle and the implications those events have for the state of our revolutionary movement today. 40 years after the World Tribunal for African Peoples, the African People's Socialist Party continues on our path to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. This book, The Verdict is In, Reparations Now, helps to keep us on task. It reminds us that the opportunist acquisition of a payoff by the U.S. government, should it survive this current crisis, is not a substitute for the seizure of absolute Black power over our African continent, our lives, and our dignity. We are reminded that reparations is a function of the revolution, and that victory will allow us the ability to pay ourselves reparations. U.S. hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa, reparations now. Comrade Director Uhuru.
Uhuru Chairman, and Uhuru, really want to just firstly salute the profound leadership in these readings, and I want to echo what S.G. Luwezi said about to read this book to experience vicariously through its pages the reparations tribunal that occurred, and of course being a part of the African People's Socialist Party and seeing how we've taken this demand and made it, as you said, a function of the African Revolution, how it's become a material force just by way of what the party has been able to do with the reparations demand. So really, really want to salute this incredible study. Comrades, brothers and sisters, please, you've heard the powerful readings, the excerpts that we've done up to now over this three-part series. And I want to encourage you to get the book. The Verdict is in, Reparations Now, at theburningspear.store. Get your copy today. And we're going to question answer portion in just a moment before we're going to take a look at announcements first. And I want to, as we're go ahead and bringing up the announcements, want to welcome up bring up Comrade Kinge Mayele, who is the Chief of Staff for the Office of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who is going to be letting you know how you can contribute to bringing the electrifying presentations of Chairman Omali Yeshitela to the U.S. Northeast in just a couple of weeks, on tour with the book, The Reparations Now. And while Comrade Kinge comes up, I want to remind everybody to like this video, share this video, tag your friends, your family, comrades into this discussion, even though we are about 30 minutes from wrapping up, that this discussion is something that needs to be seen by everyone. So continue to share it widely. And again, on the road to 20K subscribers on Burning Spear YouTube TV channel. So go ahead and hit that subscriber button and make sure your friends and family like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube. And now I see Comrade Kinge is joining us. Uhuru Kinge.
Uhuru, comrades, what a great study. I want to just appreciate the whole entire process and Burning Spear Publications for getting this book out, and it just seems so timely in history right now. So again, I want to encourage people, if you don't have it, it is here, it's in, order it now. And again, as was stated earlier, the chairman is about to embark on a tour of the northern region, which will go to Philadelphia, Newark, New Jersey, and New York. And we have been raising money each week to contribute to that tour to make that happen. And today I want to thank Michael, Raya, Matum, Robert, Brandon, Sarah, and Lisa for getting us to $115 today that we've raised thus far. But I just saw that someone just made a $100 contribution. That's Michael. Thank you so much. So that means today we've raised already $215. So uhuru, thank you so much. Again, the tour will be going to Philadelphia, to Newark, New Jersey, and to New York. So please make sure that you get your copy of the book today. This will be a great opportunity to get to meet the chairman if you have not yet in person versus just seeing him here on Omali Taught Me. I encourage everyone to please continue to give. We don't have to stop at the $200 or at the $215. We can keep going. Please go to www.uhurutours.com/donate and make your donation today. Again, I just want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela and just a fantastic study today. Uhuru.
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 Uhuru. Here's my darling Nova. And Nova, do you want to ask the people to donations so tour? Go ahead. Ask people to send some money. Come on, Nova. All these people are watching you all around the world. You got to say something. I've said all this talk about you. Say something, Nova.
Say Uhuru, Nova.
Say Uhuru, Nova.
Go ahead, darling. So you're not going to say anything? I can't hear you. You want mommy to. You want mommy to. Mommy talks all the time. We want Nova to. We want Nova to get. Thank you, darling. Thank you. Uhuru, comrades. Yeah. Uhuru. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
You can see it in Nova's eyes when she was calling on y'all to donate to uhurutours.com/donate.
She wants mommy to.
Yeah. Uhuru. All right.
This is coming. Luwezi said.
Uhuru. So we're going to continue on with our announcements, and so we can get into some question and answers with the chairman. And we got all these saying Uhuru Nova online. So one comrade amazing. Jewel, Syrup, all say Uhuru Nova. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
All right. So one more time. We can't say it enough. Announcing the new book, The Verdict is in, Reparations Now. This is the 40th anniversary edition of the report from the 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations to African People, including a foreword by Luwezi Kinshasa, additional testimonies, and an epilogue by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Order your copy today at theburningspear.store. Join the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party and the African liberation struggle. Drop the charges against the Uhuru 3. Donate, volunteer to the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign today. For more information, all the details, outreach materials, petition, emergency response pledge, the donation information, and all the ways in which you can be involved in this campaign, go to handsoffuhuru.org. Every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Africa time, tune in live for the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa, Africa Region broadcast. The Africa Region of the African People's Socialist Party responds to this attack with a series of programs under the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign. Join Uhuru movement leaders Tufari Mugari, Morlai Conte, and Visto Sabisa, who are making the demand for the FBI and U.S. government to back off and allow the African People's Socialist Party to advance the course of African people for self-determination. You can watch and follow these live streams on facebook.com/APSP Africa Region. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement calls on white people everywhere to attend an online workshop on Thursday, September 7th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, titled How to Make Reparations a Reality in Your Community. Learn how you can stand in material solidarity with Black power and be part of the annual Days of Reparations campaign. raising funds for Black Star Industries. Register at tinyurl.com/reparationspledge. On Monday, September 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back Coalition presents 50 years after the U.S. coup in Chile, Build the Anti-Colonial Free Speech Movement. Forward to the Black People's March on the White House on November 4th. To register on Zoom, go to tinyurl.com/buildnov4, NOV4. The International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, IPDEM, will be holding its 31st annual convention from September 8th through September 10th, 2023 in St. Louis, Missouri. Africans from around the world will convene at Aquaba Hall in North St. Louis under this year's theme, Deepening the Counteroffensive, Completing the Black Power Movement. This time, we will win. Registration is $25 for the entire weekend. You can register at INPDUM, that's INPDUM, 2023.eventbrite.com. The Verdict is in Reparations Now Fall Book Tour kicks off in the North region on Saturday, September 16th at the Uhuru Book Fair and Marketplace at Clark Park in Philadelphia. The event runs from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and features Chairman Omali Yeshitela as the keynote speaker, as well as African authors, cultural workers, a children's circle, and much more. For more details, visit oneafricamarketphilly.org. And the Verdict is in Reparations Now book tour continues on Monday, September 18th at 6 p.m. at Uhuru Furniture in Philadelphia. They are hosting an evening with Omali Yeshitela. The event also features Mike Africa Jr. from the MOVE organization, Karen Smith and Friends Revolutionary Percussion and Spoken Word, Penny Hess, Chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and more. This is an in-person event. For more details, including the link to RSVP, visit theburningspear.com/events. And all out to Washington, D.C. on November 4th for the 15th annual Black People's March on the White House, sponsored by the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace and Reparations, and the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back Coalition. The theme of this year's mobilization is not one step backwards. Drop the charges against the Uhuru 3. There will be a pre-rally on November 3rd, the day before the march, and there will be a conference on Sunday, November 5th, the day following. Register now at tinyurl.com/Uhuru3 and follow blackisbackcoalition.org and the blackpeoplesmarch.com. And if you are in Europe and can't make it to DC, come to the Black People's Rally at the U.S. Embassy in London, organized by Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa, London Organizing Committee. You can contact 07723067486 and stay tuned to the listing on theblackpeoplesmarch.com or theburningspear.com/events. And of course, make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, as well as all of the other events, presentations, news, and analysis. It's all featured on the Burning Spear TV on YouTube. So subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. And our last announcement, Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other party speakers and leaders. 2024 is right around the corner, comrades. So it gets booked up really quickly. So go to email at info@uhurutours.com or call 727-914-3621 to book Chairman Omali and other Uhuru movement speakers for your campus or organization now. So that concludes our announcements, comrades. Thank you for your patience as we have to let you know everything that's happening, and anything I didn't list, go to theburningspear.com/events to find out more information about what we're doing and how you can become involved. So now we can take some questions from our online and in-person audience in St. Louis, Missouri. And I want to first take this question from Comrade Syrup C, who is based out in the not so United Kingdom, who asks, I would like to ask the chairman of his thoughts as to the exact role of the anti-African FBA or foundational Black Americans / American descendants of slaves or ADOS people and their call for reparations, and how that differs from the reparations demand of the Uhuru movement. So, Chairman, that is the first question coming from Comrade Syrup C. And do I have St. Louis on with me?
Okay.
Okay. There you go. I can see you now. All right.
Thank you, Comrade Syrup C, for keeping this before us, because I do recognize this as a counterinsurgent effort that's being made, as this unifying demand for reparations and for the total liberation of Africa and African people globally is getting more and more traction, making a greater problem. Here you have the United States government that just recently, we've talked about it over and over again, has made the head of the Pentagon, the center of the war-making machine in the United States, an African general, and then made for the first time in the 248 history of the Marine Corps, has made given an African a 4-star, it's a 4-star general, and then put him in charge of AFRICOM. Controlling Africa from African people ourselves on the continent of Africa, and controlling Africa from contention from China and Russia. So you got America doing that all over Africa, determined to control Africa and the whole world. And you've got some people obviously in the employ. You were talking about who's employed by whom. It's clear in the employ of the United States government, of intelligence organizations, that will be splitting African people and, first of all, fighting for resources that haven't ever been allocated to anybody, hasn't been won for anybody. So it starts a split between African people who were born in the United States. There's no such thing as an American descendant of slavery. They're Africans who have been kidnapped by America and enslaved in the process of America itself being created. So this is just a bogus concept in the first place. But it pits Africans. It creates this false thing. So it's like playing the lottery. You know, Africans got as much chance of winning the lottery as we have of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party freeing us. But Africans play the lottery because Africans are poor. Your minority population, so the likelihood of even winning the lottery, even though you play the lottery so often, even though you go and get those scratch-offs and what have you, is very, very limited. But because Africans are so poor, so Africans will spend most of their money doing that. So you got a situation where poor Africans in this country, trying to take the demand for reparations, and then pit poor Africans in this country who haven't seen a penny, or who at the same time the government is cutting off things like food stamps and cutting off things like even people being able to get pittance. That has been promised to us subsequent to our struggle. Now fighting for some reparations, but who is it fighting? It's fighting against other African people, and which serves obviously the U.S. government, and not just the U.S. government. It serves to split Africans, create contention between Africans in this country and Africa in other places around the world. There's a movie not too long ago, I can't remember the name of it, that played, what was that Wakanda thing? You know, the CIA was the hero, and somehow Africans in the United States pitted against Africans on the continent, and imaginary Africans on the continent of Africa itself. So that's absolutely something that serves our oppressors. And if there's an argument that they are not being paid by the United States government, then I think they should be paid by the United States government. Anyway, that's Comrade Serap C. That's what we're looking at.
Oh, Huru, thank you, Comrade Serap C, for your question, and thank you, Chairman, for that response. And really just want to unite, that this is clearly a tactic of counterinsurgency to divide the African nation over the question of our stolen resources and the whole imposition of a colonial mode of production in the first place. And just really want to appreciate that response, Chairman. I want to read this next question from Comrade Virginia, or Ginny, who asks and quotes you, reparations is a function of the revolution. Is this what the chairman means when he says imperialism cannot survive a successful struggle for reparations and winning solidarity from white people?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what is meant here. It cannot. And, speaking of that, here we are talking about the World Tribunal reparations for African people and the 40th anniversary of the publication of that, the results of that tribunal. And I think it's worth mentioning how difficult it is for many people, including some Africans today. It wasn't true in the 1960s, or wasn't true even when this tribunal occurred. But it's so hard for people to conceive of African people in charge of our own lives, actually being self-governing. And so the notion of a tribunal is something that we establish an instrument of state power. States confer legality upon themselves. Nobody outside of the United States made what is called the United States legal, but the guns that was used to steal this land and to fight its competitors in England and other places for control of this land and control of the African people here. And then they made laws. They conferred legality upon themselves. And so it is our responsibility to have state power. And this tribunal is an instrument to develop our own power, the state power, so African people can determine and make our own laws. I mean, here you live in a country where somebody can call the police on you and have you evicted from your home if you don't pay them rent over a certain period of time. But you can't call the police to get the slumlord to fix the roof, to do anything that needs to be done in that place. That's how law functions for the oppressor against those who are oppressed and exploited. So this is a part of the process of creating our own legality. And it comes to negate the authority and power of the colonizer. So the U.S. cannot survive a successful demand for reparations by African people. And so we're not saying that this is the destroyed United States. We're saying this is the free Black people. And the question for those who defend the United States government itself, is whether or not freedom for African people is something that you find an existential problem, crisis for the United States. And in some ways, that is true in many ways. And even ordinary white people, I'm going to say this, I'm extending this time too long, but like the ignorance of white people, we're constantly reminded they don't know, they don't understand, etc. And back then when they was enslaving us, they just didn't understand that slavery was bad. All they had to do was go out and ask if they were enslaved. Say, hey, is this good or bad? You know, I mean, the ones who were oppressed knew it was bad. But I was in Washington, in San Francisco. I was in California many years. San Francisco might have been someplace in the 80s, probably early 80s. And there was a trial going on. You've heard me mention this. And there's a place in San Francisco, I think it's called Nob Hill, where wealthy white people live. And so there was a trial going on because they had captured some Africans who were engaged in these home break-ins. They were breaking into houses. They were harming, they were doing horrible things to the inhabitants, beating them up, just terrible, torturous things. And so they had this trial and they were questioning this one white woman whose house had been broken into. And she said on the witness stand that when the house was broken in, they beat up her husband with boards and just did terrible things. And she said, I thought, in the witness stand, I thought the revolution had started and ours was the first house they got to. Man. You understand? So there's this notion that somehow, Black people, out there and ready to, there is a notion that permeates the consciousness of everybody in this country, white people of the country. That's why we say, we want Black power, Black power, Black power. And the first thing you hear from white groups and their sympathizers, well, what about the white people? And it's a simple. Everybody else, you understand? Etc. So anyway, yes, Comrade Virginia. Was that Virginia?
Yes, that was Comrade Jenny Uhuru. And Chairman, we're only 5 minutes out. I wanted to see if you wanted to extend time a little bit because we just got some other questions, or we could just continue moving on and
okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I want to also address this comment from Comrade Luwezi. And I just wanted to say, Chairman, I think that a similar thing that we're engaged in today with the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa counteroffensive and is demanding, what is your position on drop the charges against the Uhuru Three? And that's the critical question that people are being confronted with today, these so-called progressives, the leftists, all of this. What is your position on dropping the charges against yourself, Chairman Yeshitela, Penny Hess, Jesse Neville, and the right for Black people to have freedom of speech, to be able to advocate for our own liberation?
Can I get
That's
to this first? There was, let's see, I saw something here. It said, Black No Cop Zone. Ooh,
That's a Comrade Dia.
that's what you were, yeah.
Dia.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. In the First World Tribunal, why do we make the distinction in that it is a tribunal for African people in the U.S. as opposed to worldwide? Is there a strategic reason for this distinction? The strategic reason for that distinction is because we're engaged in an anti-colonial struggle. Many people around the world are oppressed by imperialism. The fact is, the vast majority of the people on the planet Earth are being starved by this colonial mode of production. The vast majority of the people do not have access to electric power, to electricity, to clean water, and things like that. So everybody is oppressed, and we unite with all of these peoples, but Africans are oppressed as a people as well. And part of what will make the struggle effective against all colonialism is victory for the African people to achieve liberation as a colonized population. And it's very important for us to be able to mobilize Africans and do so even as we build relationships with other peoples. That's why on November 4th of this year, there are more than 40 different organizations and some individuals who have joined in this anti-colonial free speech movement that's challenging the hegemony of the white left over our struggle against colonialism. All the peoples, there would be people, Puerto Ricans, there would be Mexicans, there would be Filipinos, there would be Africans, there would be white leftists. Some call themselves communist, socialists, Trotskyists, and others, etc., who will be involved in this movement on November 4th. It's a movement against the whole colonial mode of production. And but we do not deny the Filipino people the right to recognize that there's a particular way that this colonialism expresses itself in the lives of Filipino people. And we do not, there are going to be people from the Leonard Peltier, from the indigenous population here. They're coming on horseback and what have you. And we do not deny just because we know we are oppressed and colonized. They don't say, well, you got to say Black people too. You can say that we demand that the indigenous people have control of our land and our resources, and we'll join with you in doing that. We had never consciously known a Nicaraguan when we joined the struggle with the Nicaraguan people from the United States. We held the first mass unity with the struggle of Nicaragua in the West, in Northern California. So we say that and we unite with that, and there's unity that goes back and forth, and they recognize our right to be free as a colonized people as well. So, Uhuru, go ahead, comrade. Let's see if we can get anything else in. I'm willing to extend it a bit if the people who are there will extend it a bit as well.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. And well, I'll just read this comment from Luwezi that says, Uhuru, Chairman, I really appreciate where you wrote, you must not allow any Negro anywhere on the face of the earth to stand up and say they stand for Black people and they ain't united in some practical organizational way. You must demand it. We don't want no more discussion about Pan-Africanism. We want a demonstration of practical organizational unity that's coordinating the revolutionary struggles of Black people around this world. Just like Africans who want us to be reminded that we are kings and queens and we have to recognize our power, it's dangerous and completely oblivious to the reality, regardless of whatever we want to tell ourselves to feel better. We are colonized. It blames individuals who are unable to, quote unquote, recognize their power. I don't know of one African over the past 600 years who has freed themselves by internalizing these cultural/symbolic characterizations. African internationalism gave me the clarity to say, unashamed, I am African, and yes, I am colonized, and the only solution is to fight back. As the party's work speaks for itself, it is through organization and struggle to overturn the material conditions that we will win. That was Comrade.
Uhuru, yes.
Uhuru. And Comrade with the username New Africa asked, Uhuru, Chairman, You have created the ideology of a superstructure. It is time to begin disrupting. Is it time to begin disrupting the mode of production of the European superstructure on the continent to replace it with ours? That's New Africa's question.
Uhuru, thank you, Comrade New Africa. The fact is that we didn't invent the ideology of a superstructure. This is something in terms of theory that was forwarded by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. But what we did do was say that this superstructure means something other than what they were talking about. Theirs was a limited definition of superstructure, even though implicit, it implied something that was universally true. But the universal truths that they came up was rooted in an understanding of history based on Europe and European development. What we've done is say that the capitalism itself, that people have defined as the enemy, came into existence as a consequence of the assault that was made on Africa and other people. So the world economy came into existence, and therefore, with the world economy, the society itself was redefined. It was no longer something that was defined from the basis of the root of simply Europe, but now the world, the world economy, the society itself is redefined. We have done that as a global entity, and so the superstructure, when we speak about it, is a colonial superstructure that has been imposed on the whole world. That means Europe, that means Africa, that means in the Philippines, Vietnam, all of that, there's a superstructure that's there. That's what we have done. And the question is it time to begin disrupting the mode of production of the European superstructure? The mode of production, which is colonial mode of production, that's what we're doing even with this discussion. That's what we're doing with all the work, the trajectory that we've been on for the last 60 years. I have been on, and for more than the last 50 years, the African People's Socialist Party, to negate the colonial power, which is disrupting the colonial mode of production, and therefore to replace that superstructure. And that's what we've been doing. The process of this work, these studies, is an assault on that superstructure, the ideas, the legal systems and stuff. That's the superstructure. The court system, the legalism, all of that's a part of the superstructure that's born from this colonial mode of production, the extraction of value from the oppressed peoples around the world. The ideas that influence and support are born from that and reinforce that. That's what we're doing. So that assault on the superstructure is something that you're participating in right now, and even the question that you've just raised. And it's so effective. Let me say this, suddenly you've seen what is characterized as the white left, the white right in the United States begin to talk about the deep state. Now, this was a profound change, development. We never heard even the recognition of the existence of the state. We've talked about the state, this organ of coercion, this bureaucracy and the organ of coercion that's exists. And now you hear people who are connected with Trump and Steve Bannon talking about the deep state, the deep state. Yeah, there's a deep state, a shallow state. There is a state that imposes itself, and it's a colonial state. So however deep you want to make it, it's sort of like whether how pregnant is somebody. The state is a state is a state. And once you introduce the state into the discussion, as we have done, as we have fought for years and years and years to introduce this discussion, then you help the people to understand how to be free, because you cannot be free just by beating up a white person who you don't like or who did something nasty or said something bad. The question is whether or not you have state power to exercise to promote, advance the interests of our people, of our class, or not. And who else exercises that state power? That's what it is that we are dealing with. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, and Uhuru, Comrade New Africa. Thank you for that question. Yes. And yes, Chairman, and we're going to move to wrap it up. But I did want to acknowledge some donors that have contributed to our $200 goal today for Uhuru Tours. That's Comrade Sayero and Melanie, whose contributions, along with donations made earlier, brought us up to $260 raised today. So you can continue to donate at uhurutours.com/donate. But I really want to express appreciation for everyone who has made a contribution to bring this man, the people's advocate, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, to the Northeast U.S. With the new book, The Verdict is in, Reparations Now. So we talked about some of the tour dates. You can go to theburningspear.com/events to see those tour dates and to see the chairman in person with this book. So thank you all so much for your contributions, your questions, which we are logging and will address at a later date. But due to our time, we're going to go ahead and begin to wrap up. But thank you so much for your participation everywhere it is that you are watching from. We appreciate you joining, liking and sharing and subscribing to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube. And Chairman, I just want to turn it over to you for any closing remarks before we officially wrap it up.
Thank you so much. I wanted to acknowledge Louis Jefferson. I see the question that you raised, and you mentioned something about Kamel Jalil Montakim and another tribunal that took place in the United States on the trial of genocide. I know Jalil Montakim, have known him when he was Anthony Bottoms, arrested by the United States government some years ago, a member of the Black Liberation Army. He was a much younger person then. So I'm conscious of him. He was, and the work that some of his forces related to him were first out in terms of condemning the FBI attack on us, etc. Our relationship has not been what it needs to be in terms of, I don't remember specifics about the tribunal they did. I do know that that tribunal should have seen itself and promoted itself and extended itself as a part of the tribunal that started in 1982. That's part of what we call for, that this is an ongoing process. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel if we've established a process, and this was the establishment of the process that we're talking about now. That would have been important. And I think that if we had been more closely related, that we would have seen that expressed moving forward. So I don't know the details of that. So, but I do want to acknowledge that, and don't want it to actually go as something that was ignored. And I just want to also express appreciation. Somebody is talking about how AFRICOM must be dismantled, and it should be dismantled. But it's not going to be good enough just to be yelling from afar. We have to have international capacity, just as Garvey had built, just like the African Socialist International, a product of the African People's Socialist Party. In fact, the dismantling of AFRICOM, I think we need to protest it, expose it, and do all of those other kinds of things. But on the African continent itself, that is to say, this revolution, recognizing itself as one movement, need to be engaged in making it impossible for it to be on our soil. Making it impossible for AFRICOM to be on our soil, to push it out and to expose the neocolonial forces that support it and allow it to exist there for their own protection on the one hand, and also and their protection, that is to say the neocolonial forces against the revolutionary forces or the potential revolutionary forces on the continent of Africa. And of course, it's there for the protection of the United States in this ongoing contest with Russia and China. So I just want to call on everybody to remember November 4th. It's going to be an extremely important mobilization for all the peoples throughout this country, and many people from other places in the world will be participating either directly or indirectly in Europe and South America, as it's called, throughout the United States, etc. Look forward to it. And I'm hoping that we have a maximum turnout for the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement Convention that's going to be happening here in St. Louis. Everybody ought to come to St. Louis because you want to see the scene of the crime where the United States government attacked us in 2022. We're talking about a tribunal, talking about putting somebody on trial. They put us on trial. Come to this world, come to the NPDM convention. That's going to be, what dates is that? What's the date? Somebody tell me. 8th and the 9th. Be here, the 8th and the 9th, right here in St. Louis. Get to St. Louis. See you in, meet me in St. Louis, etc. So get here in St. Louis, the scene of the crime. All of the stuff that we're doing now is really, we're mounting a massive counteroffensive against the assault on the people's rights to be free, against the colonial domination of the U.S. and all the other colonial powers. All power to the people, Black power to the African nation. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru, want to salute our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and all of you who participated in this study today. I also want to shout out our top commenter for today's study, which was Comrade Syrup C. So Uhuru, in the building. Uhuru. All right. So comrades, that will conclude today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study. Want to also thank our show team who helps with everything on the back end, production, promotions, curriculum development, chat moderators. You are on fire today. Make sure that you follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And of course, subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday study. Uhuru, comrades. Reparations now. Uhuru. Uhuru.